Good morning, everybody. This is Diggs. It's another beautiful day out here in the Pacific Northwest, and today we're going to talk about power creep. We're going to talk about how it manifests in War of the Visions. There's a lot of people who, because of War of the Visions MMO style updating of characters, they don't really think that power creep exists in the game. They don't think that, a unit coming out now is any different than a unit releasing back in the day. And there's some substantial differences, and you see this through the addition of secondary masteries. You see this through the addition of EX abilities. So we're going to talk about how power creep has manifested, and we're going to talk about talk about this through the lens of a bunch of different characters that we've seen and how this has changed over the year. You guys can see I got Black Rose Helena in the background. We're going to be starting with her. So let's go ahead and dig in. So right around the time of Black Rose Helena, Yuna is kind of when we started to see the game shift quite dramatically in kind of its first wave of power creep. And while it might not be as overt as Brave Exvius's, new 7-star or Neo Vision, right, where units are completely dubbed useless, there are a lot of contributing factors that you can look at. And part of the reason I'm doing this video is I think we don't talk about this very much. And I think because we don't talk about this, we don't give credit to some of the most powerful passives and abilities that are actually coming into the game right now. So Black Rose Helena kind of first came in, and Black Rose Helena and, very similarly, Yuna, kind of all around this time, they kind of revealed like the elemental compositions, were emerging for the first time. And Black Rose Helena and Dwayne kind of became a composition. And there's a couple of reasons these two units were powerful. Of course, it's going to be the elemental bonuses that they had. That was new to the game. Now, of course, we have all units in the game essentially with these elemental mastery bonuses. But there's also the question of penetration. And penetration is not something that I think the War of the Visions community spends a lot of time talking on. Back in the day when Spineblade first released, people were very adamant about getting Spineblade, and kind of that was the only time I've ever really seen defense penetration talked about in a very important way. And it isn't really until we had PvE content that required defense penetration, spirit penetration, like the recent Persona raid, where I really started realizing how much more powerful these units are that do come with penetration. And if you track kind of the release and the implementation of units with penetrating abilities, you will see that it is standard now for a unit to release with penetration. It started with defense penetration and spirit penetration, right? You started seeing some of it kind of filtering into these mastery abilities. And then it kind of shifted to now you're seeing units like Esther, right? Where you're seeing quite a large amount of defense penetration as well as slash resistance penetration. So I don't think it's a coincidence that Black Rose Helena, one of the most powerful units when she released, while it is very much about her kit, it's also about this capability to have magic resistance penetration, right? So the fact that she kind of rolled out with this, that she has these 100% abilities, that she's a very powerful hitter, that really made her successful. But it's also the combination of pairing her with Dwayne, right? Dwayne also released, and Dwayne is one of the first units that released into the game with native defense penetration in his kit, along with Spineblade. And I think he was actually ahead of his time. I think part of the reason we've seen Dwayne last the gambit is because you see him come with this penetration that we don't usually see until we look at units in the modern era, right? Now times you get Joker, you get units that have, native defense penetration 40 and their support kit is standard. And then you have their limit break with defense penetration 50 on it, right? So a lot of this stuff that would eventually become standard, Dwayne and Black Rose Helena actually came out with. And I think that's one of the reasons as we look back that they were actually so powerful. I think it's really interesting looking at what they do to a lot of the secondary masteries for units now to make them more appealing and more interesting, is they do add defense penetration. They add survivability. And a lot of the times this is done through their secondary mastery. It was with, of course, Stern. He was given defense penetration 20 in his secondary mastery. He was also given AoE resistance 10, but he was also given in his EX kit defense penetration 30 under Hazard Spirit. And you know, it's one of those things where all of a sudden Stern goes from being a unit that has no defense penetration to, with his EX and his secondary mastery, he has upwards of 50, right? First, he got a buff with his EX that got him plus 30 defense penetration if he is using that buff, and then he got an additional 20 on top of that. So this whole video, I promise, is not about just defense penetration, but I do want to just point out how relevant it is as we are looking at secondary masteries, as we are looking at EXs, and we're looking at units releasing in general. Another thing I think we have to talk about is resistances, and specifically, we're going to talk about AoE resistance. I think AoE resistance is a very powerful ability that we've seen more and more. I think we also see a lot of single hit resistance. There were a lot of TMRs back in the day that gave AoE resistance, that gave single hit resistance. They were individual unit effects. I'm pretty sure the first AoE resistance TMR was King Mont's TMR, but I don't even feel like we saw that utilized very much. And particularly as we're entering a world now where all of these units have penetration, right? They have defense pen, they have, you know, if you're Esther / resistance penetration, magic resistance penetration, all of a sudden we're in a world where, you know, area of effect resistance and single hit resistance have become arguably the most important stats in the game. And I think we are approaching a point where it'll be important to also have defense debuff immunity, you know, potentially slash resistance or other types debuff immunity. It'll be important to have a lot of these things. And I think that's the direction we're going to see the game kind of headed. And I think a lot of players look at, you know, these buffs that units give now, and they're like, oh, they give like 50%, you know, defense debuff immunity. Who cares about that, right? I think that's something that will be very prevalent in the future. And I think that's something that, you know, we should keep our eyes on, especially with TMR runes that also offer similar benefits, because it's very possible in the future we may be relying on these debuff resistances in order to kind of keep our units afloat, so to say. Now, of course, AoE resistance and defense penetration aren't the only things that have been changing in the game. You also have things like Astrius releasing, and Astrius has kind of created a new type of power creep. And of course, you can see he has that AoE resistance in his kit for his mastery ability, but there is an element of the follow-up attack or the pursuit attack that started with Noctis. It wasn't that powerful with Noctis. Noctis, you know, as powerful as Noctis was not really utilized for his pursuit ability. Even Astrius, I would argue, is not always utilized for his pursuit ability, but it's significantly more powerful. And then as we continue to go in the future, we see Lightning, right? And all of a sudden, Lightning has a pursuit ability. And Astrius's was good. Lightning's is even better, right? So we're seeing this change and this shift in the game through abilities that kind of enhance these units. And so I think pursuit-like abilities are something that's going to be really important to watch for. I also think just the addition of Re-Raise and Immortal Spirit. I can't tell you when the beginning of the Re-Raise and Immortal Spirit meta really began. I don't have a timeline for that. I didn't look it up, but I can tell you, compared to 2 years ago, compared to when the game launched, I'm pretty sure like Engelbert was the only person with guts. If that. Like, I cannot remember units ever using Immortal Spirit. And if they did use Immortal Spirit, it was relatively useless. And nowadays, if a unit doesn't have any type of a guts-like ability, if they don't have a re-raise type ability, they are quite frequently relegated unless they have some type of other enhancement. Case in point, Esther, which Esther does have guts, but a lot of times Esther doesn't survive because she has guts. Esther survives because she's such a monstrosity of stats and resistances that has been given to her, that I think Esther is the like clearest example of, maybe power creep is the wrong word for her, but an experiment. She's an example of an experiment of a unit that's being released. She, you know, looking at her resistances compared to any other unit in the game, I think it's safe to say that Esther has probably the highest weapon type resistances in the game. All right, guys, I know what half of you are going to say. Half of you guys are going to be like, Diggs, what about Whisper? What about Murmur? Yeah, I get it. I get it. They have more resistances. They're kind of useless, though, compared to Esther. The fact that Esther is a amazing unit, and she has all of these amazing things going for her, and she has all of these resistances, that is what I meant by the fact that she has a ton of resistances, and she's amazing. I get Whisper exists. I understand, sorry, I had to edit this in because I knew if I didn't, someone would be like, but Diggs. You guys, I get it. She has 15% slash resist, 15% pierce resist, 15% striking resist, 10% missile resist, and she's 15% weak to magic. I imagine that's probably the highest resistances the game has ever seen. And she has ways to buff that. She has area of effect resistance. She has barriers. Like, there is a clear-cut, experiment going on with Esther. And it's really interesting to see. It's really interesting to think about. So, even though, people talk about how good the game is, we see updates to Stern that make them relevant. More recently, we saw an update to Ruin Stern on the JP side, which, if you haven't seen Ruin Stern's update, his secondary mastery reduces the damage taken 100% for one time, which is crazy. And it also, of course, gives him slash resistance penetration. But this is just the next level and the continual progression of kind of how the game is shifting. And I don't think it's a bad thing. I think it's actually really interesting. I think it's really interesting that they update older units, very similar to an MMO, to keep these units relevant. It's just one of those things, though, where, people talk constantly about how War of the Visions doesn't have power creep. It doesn't have, dominant units that have come in and just completely sweep the game away. Sometimes it does, but you can still kind of get away with your older units. But I think War of the Visions does have power creep. And I think the power creep just happens so slowly that we kind of don't really see it. It's almost like all of the units are being leveled up slowly. And oh, there's a unit down here, we're going to pull them back up, right? It's almost like there is a playing field that just keeps raising and raising. And I'm genuinely curious at what point they can stop doing this, at what point they're going to keep or kind of add fresh context to the game, because you can only have units with Immortal Spirit, with Guts, with Re-Raise, with reduced damage taken 100% for one time. You can only do that type of stuff so much, right? We already have Dark Little Leela, right, coming out, the 100 cost Leela from the JP side, which is going to have a Guts-like ability that heals her, which is a kind of evolution on the Guts ability. But there's only so many things I feel like we can do, especially with a 3-man PvP on a horizontal level to try and balance this out. I'm not sure where they plan on taking this. It feels like there may be, complexity that needs to be added is not going to be you can only go up a certain level. I think what needs to happen is we need to almost expand the game a little bit. Instead of maybe doing 3v3 arena, if we can change it to 5v5, right? I think they've done a really good job with pick match, for example, but kind of changing things up and adjusting things, because the power creep is going to reach a point where, we've talked about the reincarnate, we haven't talked about the reincarnation system, but the reincarnation system is going to be coming out. It's been data mined, and how, is that really the answer that we need? Is that the answer to how we're going to continue to make units relevant? Are we just going to keep boosting units up? Are we just going to, is the game going to get to a point where it's just we're dealing 50,000 damage to each unit now because each unit has 1 billion HP? I don't know. But the main point of this video was I wanted to just say that power creep exists in the game. We had a viewer come in that was talking about struggling on the raid, and I think that's the first time we really talked about power creep in stream, where you have to have defense penetration for this raid. You can't just run a rainbow composition that a lot of content creators would recommend. PvE content is getting harder, and in some respect, you have to have defense penetration to be successful now, at least in this last raid you did. So interesting things to consider. I'm looking forward to hearing what you guys have to say in the comments down below. I'll catch you guys on stream later tonight during maintenance, and I will see you guys next time.